Note to self, next time I do a post that I mention a new term, be prepared to answer what that term means, because I made up a phrase and then everyone asked me what that phrase means, and now I have to actually know what I meant. I mean, I know what I thought. I know how I do this thing. But when people ask me what constitutional eating is, now I have to have a way to explain what it is, why it's important, how you figure it out, how do you eat constitutionally. So I think I'm going to end up doing like 18 podcasts explaining what I mean and trying to figure out how to explain and share what that involves. So it was part of a top 10 list about things that are good for your immunity. And I don't know, it was the first, it was number one or number two or something. It was like critical. So obviously I feel like it's important. But constitutional eating involves a customized diet based on your unique genetics, physiology, location, specific needs, environment, locale, season, ability to digest, all these things. So there isn't just one method, perhaps, to identify what your constitutional diet should be. Because, one, there's lots of things and lots of variations of why people need to eat different things and at different times. And you'll find that if you stick to one type of philosophy of diet, then it's going to contradict. And that's one of the main things people ask me, or they mention in conversation, is like, I don't know what to eat because I Google it and one website says I should eat this, and then the next website says, no, this is the absolute worst thing that you should not be eating. So what do I do? And I'm like, I don't know either. Let's try to figure it out. So a lot of people, like, just to kind of take a broader approach and then zero in, a lot of people in certain health fields, they'll be like, dairy is very important because it's natural, healthy fats, and it's very nutrient dense. But then I just get everyone off dairy because it creates so much mucus and inflammation and immune dysfunction. But then depending on where you live in the world, the dairy is fantastic for you. And then other parts of the world, no cultures consume dairy unless you're a baby or a baby cow. And then there's other parts of the world where it's like, well, you don't have it at this time of year because you'll have more mucus, and especially in cold climates. So now you can see how there's a dilemma of like, well, we can't just take a food based on its, like, what it contains. Milk has protein. Milk has like vitamins. You should eat those things, right? Not necessarily, because if you can't digest it, or it causes more harm than good, then that has to be investigated and understood. Because if you do better with a substitute or an alternative, and I'm not saying to use non-dairy cheese, as I'm saying get your nutrition from other foodstuffs, then we're now building up your specific diet. Something in my eye. Now, if you want to know what an ideal diet is for you, we have to sit down and figure out what your problems are. Now, if you want to lose weight, you're probably going to be reducing your carb intake. You're going to be increasing your protein. I find more often than not, regardless of where people are, most people don't eat enough protein. Usually people who are training and they have like knowledge of health and they've seen dietitians or nutritionists before, they're really into like macros, and like I get like 150 grams of protein every day. I'm like, maybe you don't need that much. I don't know. But then I'm not trying to throw another wrench and confuse things. Another element is the time of year, because some people are like, I have a smoothie every day. I'm like, that sounds wonderful, unless you live in a cold climate, and depending on what you put in that smoothie. Like people, as soon as they said ice, I'm like, yikes! Don't put ice in your smoothie, especially when it's 0 degrees outside. Your stomach is like a furnace, and it needs to cook your food. And there's a lot of people who they like raw food, or like eating as much raw as possible, because they feel like that has the maximum potential of nutrition. Because once you start cooking something, it starts to break down. However, for you to take out the nutrition in that food internally, it does need to be digested and cooked in your stomach. Encoding overload. I'm sure it'll be fine. If you're going to digest something, you want to make it bioavailable. And making things bioavailable means that your stomach can break down sufficiently well with acid and enzymes, and doesn't have to spend so much effort taking a completely whole raw piece of cabbage, and it has to break it down, it has to cook it. Like cold things coming into our body is not a natural thing. Like we have a core temperature. Something that is 30 degrees colder than that, what do you think is going to happen? It's got to melt or be brought up to temperature. Your body can't digest things frozen, per se. But I think you know my point. So then I tell people, maybe focus on soups and stews. And they'll be like, well, it's too hot to have soup. I'm like, where we are, it ain't hot that long. I'm not saying you have an August big bowl of soup. It wouldn't do you any harm, though. To be honest, probably give you a good sweat, detox you a bit. But soups and stews, we don't have those in our culture. Mainly because it takes time to produce. Maybe there's a sentiment that it's like, oh, there's like, actually someone mentioned the other day, they're like, but I feel like it's too much food I'm eating. I'm like, a bowl of soup? I mean, if you look at a plate, you pour that into a bowl, you're probably eating more in a plate than in a bowl. But the bowl of soup will fill you. That's what I say. So understanding that our stomach is to cook and refine and break down all the nutrition, and to ensure that we have sufficient enzymes. And that's another thing I've been coaching and recommending to patients is digestive enzymes, or betaine, hydrochloric acid, because no one's breaking down anything at all. People will be like, I eat pretty well, but like I go to the washroom every 2-3 days. I feel really bloated after I eat. I kind of turned off meats. I don't really feel like it agrees with me. Then they start gravitating towards carbs. And now they're shifting their gut biome because they're taking in too much carbohydrate. They're inactive or insufficiently active to offset the amount of carbohydrate coming in. So they end up storing carbs as fat, get a fatty liver, and then they don't feel like eating, and this perpetuates a big problem. So how does constitutional eating come into this? I would say you need to understand the concept of a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a snack if needed. And I try to get people to eat every 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours. Grazing, like kind of little nitpicking here, there, terrible. You will gain tons of weight because your insulin is kind of, you're overstimulating the cells, they become resistant. So then the next time you have any portion of carbohydrate, stored as fat instantly. There's nothing you can do about it. Even if you're, and then the other thing is people don't eat enough calories. They think, oh, I'm going to cut my calories. It's like you're going to gain weight. Calorie cutting is a cue for your body to gain weight. So if you want to lose weight, be more active. Stop having so many carbs. Stop skipping meals. So we kind of need to, that little lint's going to bother me. I'm gonna have to like white it out in post-production. Let's see. What other nuggets to... I'm not certain I love eating right for your blood type, or there is something to be said about genetic testing for nutritional needs. So that's part of constitutional eating, where I don't know if the blood type specifically is super useful. I feel like there's people who do really well with it, and then other people are like, I don't feel like that agrees with me. So I don't jump into that boat too much. But I do feel like there is something to be learned from your genetics. And if you have a predisposition or a mutation in some enzymes that maybe you'll need a higher intake of folic acid or other cofactors, or that you just, your body doesn't selectively take in vitamin D. So knowing that information is actually really useful without it being confusing. And I like that and I say it's not confusing because it's based on your genetics. It's not just sort of a generalized catch-all philosophy that you looked up online. The other thing, food sensitivity testing. That I really, really push for all my patients to do. I think it's critical. Because you do want to know right now what your body's antibody load is to certain food proteins. We can't just generally remove gluten and dairy and assume that we've solved the sensitivity problem. Adding in digestive enzymes also helps reduce the sensitivity issue. But now we're starting to get like a little bit of a feel for what is constitutional eating. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack if necessary, eating every 3 to 4 hours to stabilize your blood sugar, leaning on more protein, not so many carbs, protein at each meal, looking at genetics and or sensitivities to identify if there's something that you really shouldn't be having. Eating right for the season, leaning towards warm and cooked foods. I feel like that's a good start. That will be part 1 for constitutional eating. What would part 2 look like? I think part 2 will go more into details on what a sample day will look like, and how to pick out if there's foods that just agree with you and don't agree with you. Now, this is probably going to go towards like the nightshades, potatoes, starch, breads and pastas, red meat versus chicken versus fish. Because I think there is definitely something to be said about like people will tell me intuitively, and I do have to listen when they're like, I really don't do well with red meat. And even if I give them betaine, it may not be sufficient to override this lack of acid production, but they just might not do well. So maybe it's a blood type thing. Maybe it's a stress thing. There is something about the energetics of food and trauma. So maybe someone yelled at you at a barbecue. We'll find out.